Hi, Form 5. So in this video, I'm just going to explain very briefly what private enterprises are, and then talk a little bit about limited companies. Okay, so we've learned about private enterprises, and public corporations. Now, a public enterprise is a company that is owned by a few people or individuals. So if you remember, we talked earlier about QQ, and QQ is owned by Pony Ma and two of his friends. They are the owners. And it's a for-profit company, which means QQ can make as much money as it wants. There's no limit. And this is a good thing. It's a good thing because that means the employees will have higher incentive or motivation to work hard or to be productive. The harder you work, the more productive you are, the higher your income or salary is going to be. Now, the one bad thing about a private company is that not everyone might be able to afford a good or a service. So if we think about an iPhone X, everyone wants to buy an iPhone X, or most people do, but not everyone can afford to buy it, and that is the problem with private companies. So even if you want to buy a good or a product, sometimes you just can't. You don't have enough money. So we also know that there are three types of private enterprises, and we've already looked at two of them. So we have sole proprietorships, general partnerships, and limited companies. So we're going to look at limited companies, which are the most common companies in the world today. So let's look a little bit deeper. Okay, so what is a limited company? Now, a limited company, of course, is a private company that can have at least one owner or shareholder. Now, what is a shareholder? Or what is a share? So a share is a percentage of a company, and you can buy shares. So there's some shareholders that own a higher percentage of limited companies than others. Now let's look at an example. An example of a limited company could be McDonald's. McDonald's has more than one owner, more than one shareholder. It can have thousands, even hundreds of thousands of shareholders all over the world. Now, if we said that McDonald's has 100 shares and there are only 10 shareholders, now I know this makes no sense. I said just now there are hundreds of thousands of shareholders, but let's say there are only 10 shareholders in the world. Then of course, each shareholder only owns 10% of McDonald's. So that is one aspect, one feature of a limited company, is that there's at least one shareholder. Now, of course, the sole proprietorship has just one shareholder. And a general partnership should have at least two owners. And there can be up to 50 or 100 owners in a general partnership. Now, what else is true about limited companies? So limited companies, or the owners of a limited company, the shareholders, bear limited liability. Now, this is a good thing. What this means is, if a limited company, for example, like Apple or Microsoft, if they borrowed money from the bank and it has to repay the loan, then if a limited company has limited liability, this is good for the shareholders because you only have to pay or owe the amount that you invested. That means the amount of money you paid to buy shares or a percentage of the company. So if you look over here, if a company owns 500,000 to the bank and I'm a shareholder, I'm an owner, and I only own 5%, then my liability is only going to be 25,000. So in a sole proprietorship, I have unlimited liability. That means if I don't have enough money in cash or if I don't have enough money in my bank account to pay what I owe, the bank can take everything that I own. It could be my car, my house, all of my assets, all the things that I own, which is why I bear unlimited liability as a sole proprietor. So actually, this is why limited companies are called limited. It's because the owners or the shareholders only suffer or bear limited liability. So if you don't want to face so much of risk, if you want to lower your risk, it's better to buy shares or a percentage of limited company shares. So that's a very good thing about limited companies. Sorry, not that. Now, management structure. So if you remember, in a private company, the owners are the people who started the company, the shareholders, right? So again, we already know that shareholders are the owners of a company. If you invest or if you buy stock or shares of any limited company, it can be KFC, it can be Uniqlo, for example, then you are an owner. And it is possible for a limited company to have many, many owners. So that is the ownership part. If I buy stock or shares, I'm an owner. Now, what is also true is that shareholders choose a board of directors. So if you remember from a public corporation, the government elects or votes for a board of directors. A board of directors, their responsibility, their job is to make sure that the employees are not being lazy, they're working hard. They have to make sure the money is not being wasted, the resources are being used well. So if you buy shares in a company, you're an owner, and you can also choose who runs the company every day. So for example, I'm a teacher. I can still be an owner of a company as long as I buy stocks. So maybe I buy Alibaba shares or stocks. It's the same thing, shares and stocks. And if I own 10% of the company, every year I can choose who the board of directors will be. I can decide, or I can be one of those people who decides, okay, this year I want these people to manage Alibaba. I can vote. Maybe the people that I vote for might not be chosen in the end, but I can still vote because I am a shareholder. I own a percentage of Alibaba. So that is management structure of a limited company. And it can be like that for McDonald's, for for QQ, for all the big companies that you know, Nike, Adidas, Puma. These are all limited companies, the biggest companies in the world. So now we also have lasting continuity. So for a limited company, this is different because what we've seen is that for a sole proprietorship or a general partnership, if the owners die, if one of the owners die in a general partnership, and if the owners don't transfer their shares, the percentage that they own, to a friend or to relatives, then the general partnership ends, it dies. And it's the same for a sole proprietorship. If I own a business, for example, I make glasses, and I am a sole proprietor, and I decide not to transfer my shares to anyone, then when I die, the day I die is the day my glass company dies. But for a limited company, this is different. It doesn't matter how many shareholders there are. It doesn't matter how many of them die. No matter what, the company still lives on. It doesn't die. That's what we mean by lasting continuity. When Steve Jobs died, Apple didn't die. When Bill Gates will die one day, Microsoft won't die. This is what we mean by lasting continuity. Okay, so in a limited company, what is also a little bit different are the tax rates. Now, this is something that I haven't taught you before, or we haven't discussed. But every company in the world has to pay taxes. So when we were looking at public enterprises, we learned that citizens pay taxes, and then the government will use some of those taxes to pay employees, which is why they have no motivation or incentive to work hard, because they get fixed salaries or they're paid by time rate, because no matter what, they will still be paid by our wages, by our taxes. Now, companies pay taxes too. If you think about Macau, all the casinos have to pay taxes. And casinos are, they can be limited companies because people can buy a percentage of Wynn Palace or Venetian. They can be shareholders or owners of casinos. And so casinos or limited companies also have to pay taxes. And they pay a higher tax rate than sole proprietorships and general partnerships. So in the real world, if you're a sole proprietorship or if you're a general partnership, you only have to pay 10% of the profit that you make. So let's say last month, a general partnership made 3 million patakas. Then how much tax do they pay? They pay 10% of 3 million, or 30,000, I think. Now, if you're a limited company, you pay much more in taxes. You might even pay double of that. So again, let's say Google made 30 million last month. Now they have to pay 20% of 30 million, which is 6 million. That is a lot of money. So usually the bigger the company is, the more shareholders there are, the higher their tax expenses. Expense, right, is a cost. It's money that you have to pay for something. And then the government will use those taxes, again, to pay public enterprise employees, maybe to fund or to pay for public hospitals, etc., etc., to provide more services to the public so that people can afford. So this is where taxes come from. They also come from limited companies. Actually, most of the taxes come from limited companies, and it makes sense. They pay the highest percentage. They have the highest tax rate, which is why governments collect the most taxes, the most tax income from limited companies. Okay. And so lastly, we have sources of capital. And sources of capital is a little bit complicated. So I will make another video to explain sources of capital. Basically, what it means is where do limited companies get their money from? If a company grows, you need more money, maybe to buy more machinery, to pay, to hire more labor or employees. So then the company has to think, okay, how can we make more money to pay for more projects, to make our company grow? And yeah, like I said, we will talk about this another time. Okay, so that's what limited companies are in general. And we have two types of limited companies: the private limited companies, or PLCs, and public limited companies, or LTDs. So anyway, if you see any brand with limited, then you know it's a public limited company. I think Nike, or even McDonald's. Any brand with limited is a public limited company. So what are the differences between a private limited company and a public one? So let's take a quick look. So a private limited company is very small. It can only have between 1 and 50 shareholders or owners. You cannot have 51. You cannot have more than 50 shareholders. It's a very strict rule. Now another thing is, let's say I'm one of the 50 owners of a small limited company. Now these companies actually are not very famous. They're not well known. These are the companies that we don't hear about in the news every day because they're much smaller. Now, if I'm one of the 50 owners and I decide to transfer my shares, let's say I own 5% of a private limited company and my brother or my bro is broke and he needs money, so I decide to transfer it to him. Now I can't just do that anytime I want. I need permission. I need to ask the other owners, the other 49 owners, right? So let's say I want to transfer 10% of MSN stock, not to say that MSN is a private company, this is a mistake, of private limited PLC stock to my brother. So what I need to do then is to ask the other 49, there should be 49 owners. Okay, not 2000, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. But if I correct it, then I have to start filming all over again. So let's say 49, okay? This is not MSN stock, this is just PLC stock, private limited company stock, or shares to the other 49 owners, because we can only have up to 50 owners. And if they approve, if they allow me to do that, then yeah, I can just transfer all the shares to my brother, he doesn't have to work again, and he can pay all his bills, and he won't be broke anymore. And there's one more thing that we need to know about private limited companies. So, if I want to share, if I want to sell my stock, I don't transfer it. I just want to sell it to someone and get money for that. Again, I cannot do that in the public market. Now, in the public market, as long as you have enough money, you can go in the market and you can buy stock of any limited company. If you're rich enough, you can buy Facebook stock, Google stock, Microsoft stock. Again, stock and shares are the same. So if you hear me saying stock or shares, what I mean to say is the same thing. It means a percentage of a company. Now, if shares are not listed, that means you cannot buy them in the public market. So if I want to sell my shares, what do? Well, I have two options. I could sell it to another shareholder. So again, there are only 50 shareholders, up to 50 shareholders in the private limited company. If I want to sell my shares or stock, I can share it to another shareholder freely. I can do that anytime I want. I don't need permission or approval from another shareholder. But if I wanted to sell my shares to a family member or to a friend, then that's a little bit different. I need permission. I need to ask the other 49 shareholders. So that is how a private limited company, or a PLC, is different. Now, of course, we have private limited, public limited companies. These are the companies we hear about all the time, every day. All the big companies that we know, right? So, firstly, and we can just call these LTDs. LTDs. Now, an LTD, or a public limited company, can have an unlimited number of shareholders. So Facebook can have millions of shareholders, millions of people who buy shares on the market. If you're rich enough, you can buy a share, and that makes you an owner. So Mark Zuckerberg isn't the only shareholder. He's the biggest one. He owns more. He owns a higher percentage of Facebook than anyone else. But there are millions of other people who also own Facebook because they buy shares. Then another thing is, in a public limited company, in an LTD, there's free transfer of shares. Now what this means is, like I own Alibaba stock, Alibaba shares, and I want to transfer it to my friend Ali. Now I can do that whenever I want. Unlike a private limited company, a PLC, I don't need to ask the other shareholders. I can just do it whenever I want. Right now, I can just sell my shares right now, whenever I want. So if I look at an example, or if we look at an example, Jack Ma. Jack Ma, of course, is the CEO. He's the main owner of Alibaba. And he has a son named Jackson. Now this is not true, okay? I'm only joking. Now, one day he decides to transfer 90% of his shares to his son. Now he can do this. He can do this right now as we're speaking or listening. So that's the freedom you have as a shareholder of a public limited company. Pretty cool, right? So lastly, we can sell shares of public limited companies in the public market. Now, let's say that all of us own Snapchat shares. Now, Snapchat is an LTD. It's a public limited company. If you're rich enough, you can go on the public market and buy Snapchat stock or shares. So when a public limited company is on the public market, that's when we say it's a listed company. It's in the stock market, and you can buy as many shares as you want, or as you can. So I can share it to whoever I want in the public market. I can share 5% of my Google stock or shares on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange market. So this is a public market, and Google is a listed company on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So anyone who owns Google, any Google shareholder, can sell their shares or their stock on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange market, a public market. So that is what public limited companies or LTDs look like. Whereas a private limited company, a PLC, is different. There are fewer shareholders. If I want to transfer my shares, I need to ask the other 49 shareholders, and I cannot sell my shares in the public market. I can only sell it to another shareholder with complete freedom. I don't have to ask them, or I could sell it to my family members or friends, for which I would have to ask the other shareholders. So those are the differences between private and public.